Hello, my name is Alina. All I ever wanted was a piece of peace. My farmhouse, built from nothing but sacrifice and dreams. But then my sister walked in, smirking, claiming Dad had promised it to her. And worse than her smirk was the years of lies, quiet betrayals that drained my savings, stole my future, and left me standing alone in my own home. How far would they go to erase me from everything I built? The farmhouse stood proud under the harsh Texas sun, a testament to 10 years of grit, skipped vacations, and sleepless nights. Every plank, every stone, every acre was mine, not handed down, not gifted, but earned. I had built a quiet, independent life here, one free from the endless expectations of the family I had once tried so hard to please. That afternoon, the air was thick with heat and the promise of an approaching storm. I had set the dining table carefully for the family reunion. Simple dishes, nothing fancy, but enough to show respect without pretending. I wasn't expecting gratitude, but I didn't expect what came next either. Without knocking, without so much as a text, Darlie, Russell, and Dolores barged through the front door like they owned the place. Darlie kicked off her heels by the fireplace, grinning wide as she wandered barefoot across my hardwood floors. My parents trailed behind her, casually inspecting the house like real estate agents before an open house. "Nice spread," Russell muttered, tapping his knuckles on the oak kitchen island like he was testing it for resale. Dolores didn't say a word. She never did unless it was to agree with Russell or Darlie. I stayed frozen by the window, hands tight around the coffee mug I'd been sipping. They hadn't even said hello, not one word of acknowledgement that this was my home. Darlie turned in the living room, her voice slicing through the silence. "Dad promised this farmhouse to me," she said, flashing a smirk sharp enough to cut steel. "You really thought this was yours?" The words hit harder than I let show. I set the mug down gently, suppressing the tremor in my hand. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not today. I watched as she strutted across my living room, tracing her fingers along the window frames, eyeing the vaulted ceilings like she was already decorating in her mind. Russell gave a grunt that might have been agreement, or maybe it was just another dismissal of me, another reminder that in their eyes, I'd never be enough. The memories flooded back. Every check I wrote to bail them out, every late-night call I answered when Darlie crashed her car or lost her job. It had never been enough to earn their respect. And now, standing in my living room, they were ready to erase me altogether. Still, I said nothing. Silence was a language they had taught me well. Darlie crossed her arms, giving me a sideways glance full of pity masked as arrogance. "It's cute you thought buying it meant anything." I smiled then, a small, cold thing that didn't reach my eyes. If they thought entitlement and empty promises could steal my life's work, they were about to learn a very different lesson. The smug tilt of Darlie's chin was still lingering in the air when I heard the heavy thud of boots on the porch. The front door creaked wider, and there stood Russell, late as always, but arriving like he owned not just the house, but the very air inside it. He didn't bother wiping his boots, didn't even glance at me. His eyes swept the room, the walls, the high beams overhead, as if inspecting inventory he planned to list for sale. Russell took his time walking the length of the living room. He gave a low grunt, then turned, voice sharp enough to cut the air. "You don't belong here, Alina," he said, loud and deliberate, making sure every word hung thick between the walls I had built with my own hands. I didn't flinch. Inside, though, my chest tightened like someone had tied a rope around my ribs and pulled. In the corner, Dolores stood with her purse clutched in front of her like a shield, offering nothing but silence, the kind that screams more than words ever could. Russell moved closer, stopping just short of invading my space. "This place was supposed to stay in the family," he said, his voice dropping to a mockingly paternal tone, "not get sold off piece by piece to prove some point about independence." I caught Darlie exchanging a smug glance with him, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The message was clear. Loyalty wasn't unconditional in our family. It was earned through obedience, and I had dared to disobey. "You think money makes you better than blood?" Russell asked, jabbing a finger toward the window where the sun was bleeding into the canyon beyond. "It doesn't. Money doesn't change where you come from, girl." Dolores shifted, but still said nothing, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. Watching her pretend she wasn't a part of this hurt worse than the words themselves. They had decided long ago who deserved to be heard in this family, and who didn't. I took a slow breath, letting their accusations swirl around me like dust in the late afternoon light. I had choices now. I could scream, demand respect, fall into the trap of their chaos, or I could hold my ground, let their cruelty pile up until it toppled under its own weight. So I chose silence. I met Russell's glare head-on, refusing to look away. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before he masked it with another barked insult about forgetting where I came from. But deep inside, a new certainty had started to form. They could try to bully, shame, or erase me, but they could not take away what I had built. Not anymore. I didn't move at first. I let the weight of Russell's words settle into the cracks they had carved over a lifetime. Then, slow and steady, I crossed the room toward the kitchen island where I had left a manila folder tucked just beneath a stack of recipe magazines. My heart beat a deliberate rhythm, not from fear, but from focus. I flipped the folder open and slid out a crisp document, thick with embossed seals and legal signatures. I placed it squarely on the countertop, the sound sharp against the stillness that had taken over the room. "This," I said calmly, "is the deed." The words didn't shout. They didn't tremble. They landed heavy, final. Darlie's smirk faltered first, her arms uncrossed. She blinked as if she could erase the paper from existence by sheer denial. Russell stepped closer, squinting at the document like it might explode. Dolores stayed frozen near the doorway, her hands wringing the strap of her handbag. Darlie's silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then she erupted. "You tricked him!" she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You manipulated Grandpa into giving you this place. You lied to all of us." Her voice cracked in a way that wasn't grief. It was entitlement, pure and raw. She lunged forward, but Russell threw out an arm across her chest, holding her back like a parent restraining a tantrum-prone child. Not to protect me, never for me. Only to keep her from making a bigger fool of herself in front of Dolores, in front of their precious family friends who would be arriving soon. Dolores mumbled something, a useless string of sounds, neither apology nor defense, and pretended to study the scuff on the toe of her shoe. I stayed rooted to the floor, the deed between us like a sword plunged into stone. They could scream, accuse, twist the truth until it was unrecognizable. It wouldn't change the facts. Watching Darlie unravel, watching Russell and Dolores scramble to contain the spectacle, it hit me with a cold, cutting clarity. This was never about love. It was about ownership, about who could control who. And standing there in the fading light of my own home, I realized something else. I wasn't theirs to control anymore. The house was still buzzing with the aftershocks of Darlie's outburst. When the sharp chime of the doorbell sliced through the tension, everyone turned instinctively, caught in that awkward, frozen moment where pride dared anyone to move first. I wiped my palms against my jeans, crossed the floor, and opened the front door. Standing there was Travis, Darlie's ex-boyfriend, clean-cut, sober-eyed, and holding a thick manila folder tucked under one arm. His presence hit harder than any insult had that afternoon. Darlie's face drained of color faster than a storm rolling across the plains. "Mind if I come in?" Travis asked, voice neutral but firm. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like a man with nothing left to lose and everything to reveal. The air inside shifted, suspicion, dread, a heavy foreboding that settled into the bones of the room. Without waiting for an invitation, Travis laid the folder down on the kitchen island, right next to the deed I'd shown them earlier. He flipped it open, pulling out a series of printed emails, screenshots, even notarized statements. "I thought it was time the truth got its turn," he said, glancing once, briefly, at Darlie before focusing on me. He spoke in clipped, careful sentences. Darlie had created fake messages, doctored screenshots to frame me for threats I'd never made, rewrote email chains to make herself look like a victim. Timestamps didn't match. IP addresses were traceable to her old laptop. Witnesses, old mutual friends, confirmed under oath that Darlie had boasted about keeping receipts in case she ever needed to ruin someone. The color on Russell's face shifted from dismissive arrogance to a slow, ugly red. Dolores wrung her hands until the knuckles went white, but she didn't speak. She never spoke when it mattered. Darlie tried to interrupt. "This is fake! Travis, you're just bitter because you used me?" Travis snapped back. "No, Darlie, I'm not bitter. I'm done." He flipped one last page, a signed affidavit from one of her former co-workers. The room felt colder, heavier, like gravity itself had deepened. Darlie stumbled backward, looking for someone, anyone, to shield her. Russell crossed his arms and stayed silent. Dolores bit her lip, staring at the documents as if willing them to catch fire and disappear. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was its own kind of earthquake, and the first cracks were already spiderwebbing across everything they thought they had built. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint flutter of the papers Travis had laid bare on the counter, evidence that no one could deny. Or so I thought. Russell cleared his throat, loud enough to reclaim attention. His jaw set, and he spoke as if Travis hadn't said a word, as if the documents didn't exist between us. "Families don't turn on each other," he muttered, his voice low but steely, like a verdict carved in stone. A twisted sense of irony coiled in my gut. Turning on me, his own daughter, was apparently acceptable. But calling out Darlie's lies? Unforgivable. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, feeling the solid ground beneath me, something they couldn't take away. Across the room, Dolores stood by the fireplace, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked smaller somehow, shrinking into the wallpaper. Her mouth opened slightly as if a protest might escape, then closed again. A tremor flickered in her eyes, a flash of doubt so brief that if I blinked, I might have missed it. But she said nothing. As always, silence was her shield, and her betrayal. Darlie sniffed dramatically, forcing tears that never quite came. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad," she whimpered. "We're family. We're supposed to forgive each other." The manipulation dripped from her words like spoiled honey. Russell nodded in grim agreement. "Blood is blood," he said, like that was supposed to absolve everything. I inhaled slowly, tasting the bitter residue of every time I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping peace. Not this time. "If you choose to protect her lies," I said, my voice cool and razor-sharp, "then you are choosing to lose me forever." Russell's face twitched, an almost imperceptible crack in his mask of control. Dolores looked down at her hands like they might offer her a different answer if she squeezed them hard enough. For the first time, it wasn't just Darlie who looked afraid. It was them. My parents. The ones who had always believed they could guilt me, silence me, shape me into whatever version suited their needs. Not anymore. I stood straighter, grounding myself in the truth that they had tried to erase. And for once, I didn't care who heard it or who it shattered. The heavy silence cracked open by my words still hung between us when I stepped forward, planting myself in the center of the living room. The late afternoon sun stretched long, tired shadows across the floor, framing me like a boundary none of them could cross anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. I spoke with the clarity that had taken me 34 years to find. "I am not your scapegoat anymore. This ends here." Russell opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, sharp and final. He snapped his jaw shut with a click. Darlie's face contorted into something half rage, half desperation. Dolores wiped at her eyes, her hand trembling as she clutched her sweater closer around her body like armor. For a beat, no one moved. Then Darlie exploded. "You think you're better than us now?" she screamed, voice shrill enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. "You're gonna regret this, Alina. You'll regret turning your back on your own family." Russell bellowed something about loyalty and betrayal, but his words blurred into white noise. Dolores sobbed into her hands, the sound jagged and sharp, slicing through the room like broken glass. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I turned away, walking calmly, deliberately, toward the back hallway. Their voices crashed behind me, growing smaller with every step I took, until they became nothing more than background static. A life I was no longer willing to live. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me with a soft, definitive click. I leaned against it for a moment, letting the muffled chaos downstairs fade into insignificance. Outside, the Texas sky burned with the last orange threads of daylight. I pushed open the window and breathed in deeply, the smell of dry earth, sun-baked wood, and the faint, sweet hint of honeysuckle from the wild vines climbing the fence. Grief tangled in my chest, stubborn and aching. I mourned for the family I had wished for, not the one I had. But underneath that grief, like a current too strong to deny, was something else, relief. No one else's demands would ever dictate my life again. I belonged to myself, finally and completely. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I worked in the garden, repaired the old barn doors, watered the wildflowers lining the gravel drive. For a moment, it almost felt like peace had finally found me. Until my phone buzzed with a dozen notifications. Curious, I wiped my hands on my jeans and checked the screen, and my stomach twisted. There it was. Darlie's public post on Instagram, bright and venomous. Sometimes family steals from you with a smile. Sometimes the people you trusted the most will lock you out of what's rightfully yours. Pray for me, y'all. Attached was a photo, an old snapshot of the farmhouse back when the paint was peeling and the gutters sagged. Carefully curated heartbreak. The comments rolled in like a sick tide. Stay strong, girl. Can't believe someone would do that to family. You deserve better. I didn't recognize most of the names. Distant relatives, friends of friends, people who knew just enough about us to jump to the worst conclusions. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors into judgment. In small towns, social media wasn't just noise. It was gospel. I set the phone down with a calmness I didn't feel. 2 days later, the blow hit harder. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside, a letter from a law firm with Russell's name plastered at the top. They were challenging the ownership of the farmhouse. The claim was thin, laughably so. Alleging implied promises made decades ago, family heritage expectations, whatever that meant. No real legal weight, but enough to create hassle. Enough to stir doubts, enough to drain time, money, and peace. It wasn't about winning. It was about punishing me for saying no. For a long minute, I stood there at the kitchen island, staring at the papers. Then I smiled, small, sharp, unafraid. I didn't storm over to their houses. I didn't blast them back on Facebook. I picked up my phone, called my lawyer, the same woman who had helped me close on this farmhouse, and said 5 steady words. I think it's time to meet. The next morning, I sat across from her in a tidy, sunlit office, watching her flip through the file. Well, she said, tapping the letter once, this is pure intimidation. I nodded. Then let's respond accordingly. We crafted a reply that was clean, firm, and absolutely unshakable. I didn't just defend myself, I fortified my future. There would be no loopholes left open, no strings for them to pull. If they wanted a war, they would get one, but it would be fought on my terms. Dolores showed up 2 days later. I spotted her through the front window, standing on the porch with a casserole dish and a nervous smile like we were starring in some bad Hallmark rerun. I didn't rush to open the door. I let her knock twice before I pulled it open and leaned against the frame. Alina, she said, her voice trembling, can't we just put this behind us? She held out the casserole like a white flag. I said nothing, only stepped aside, watching her shuffle inside with the weight of someone carrying more lies than food. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had signed the papers, where I had built my life alone, and she started weaving a speech about forgiveness and family, her words syrupy and desperate. I know mistakes were made, she said, dabbing at imaginary tears. But we have to think about the future. Family comes first. Then came the real reason. I brought some paperwork, she added, pulling a folded document from her bag. Just a simple agreement, to keep things peaceful. I took it from her hand, turning it over slowly. Hidden beneath legalese was a clause, an insidious little line, that would have handed over partial ownership to Darlie, a silent coup disguised as reconciliation. I set the paper down between us and met her eyes. No, I said simply. Dolores blinked, as if she couldn't quite comprehend being denied. I won't play your games, I said, voice low but steady. Not anymore. 2 days later, I invited them all to the farmhouse under the pretense of a family gathering. Russell, Dolores, Darlie, they came dressed for victory, smug and expectant. Instead, they walked into a room full of familiar faces, old family friends, neighbors, even a few people who had heard the rumors and wanted to see for themselves. I stood at the center, a folder in my hands. I laid it all out: the original deed, Travis's evidence, notarized documents, witness statements, everything. There was no shouting, no dramatic reveal, just the cold, hard truth unfolding like a slow, merciless tide. Darlie's face drained of color. Russell's jaw twitched. Dolores swayed slightly where she stood. I finished with one sentence: "This land, this life, it belongs to me, and none of you have any claim anymore." Silence crushed the room. Someone coughed awkwardly. Another slipped out the door. One by one, the crowd dissolved, leaving my so-called family standing alone, stripped of every lie they had clung to. I didn't stay to watch them leave. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door. On the porch, on the past, on them. Freedom had a cost, but losing them was a price I was willing to pay. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing them, and that chapter of my life, outside for good. In the weeks that followed, I finished what I had started. I met with my lawyer again, signed the final documents, dotted every I, crossed every T. There would be no appeals, no sneaky loopholes, no second chances. The farmhouse, the land, the title, every square inch was mine. Undisputed. Unbreakable. The silence inside the house felt different now. Not empty, free. Meanwhile, outside my quiet sanctuary, the fallout began. Whispers turned into full conversations. Darlie's posts vanished from social media almost overnight, but the damage was already done. People talked. The ones who had nodded along to her sob stories now gave her a wide berth at grocery stores and PTA meetings. Invitations dried up. Her name floated on the wind like a bad memory. Russell and Dolores didn't fare much better. Neighbors who had once attended their 4th of July barbecues now crossed the street to avoid them. Old friends grew conveniently busy whenever they tried to reach out. They had built their reputations on an illusion, and when it shattered, they had nothing left but the sharp, unforgiving pieces. I should have felt victorious, and in a way, I did. But it wasn't triumph that lingered the longest. It was sadness. Not for them. For the idea of family I had clung to for far too long, hoping it could be real if I just worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, forgave endlessly enough. It had never been real. Still, the grief didn't drown me anymore. It flowed alongside something stronger, a fierce, steady sense of peace. With the legal battles behind me and no more ghosts banging on the doors, I turned my attention to the future. The farmhouse had always been meant for more than just survival. It deserved to be filled with life again. Real life, not just mine. I opened the gates that had once kept everyone out. I started small: local gatherings, craft fairs, Saturday markets under the oak trees. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years trickled back, not as spectators to my downfall, but as friends, curious and kind. Slowly, the land began to heal, and so did I. Standing on the porch one evening, a glass of sweet tea in my hand, I watched the sunset blaze across the Texas sky. The laughter of children echoed from the fields. Music floated up from a speaker set by the barn. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval, permission, or affection. I had lost the people who claimed to love me, but I had gained something far greater: myself. After everything that happened, standing here now, I realized something even deeper. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, about honesty, about the willingness to lift each other up, not tear each other down. Sometimes, walking away from those who were supposed to love you is the bravest thing you can do. And choosing yourself, your peace, your future, it's not selfish, it's survival. If my story taught me anything, it's this: you have the right to protect what you build. You have the right to demand respect. You have the right to walk away when love turns into control. And you, watching this right now, you are stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you feel small for fighting for your dreams. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because they didn't respect you? Or maybe you're still figuring it out? Share your story in the comments. I'm here, and so is this community. And hey, if this video touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't love it, that's okay too. Let me know why and where you're tuning in from. I want to hear from everyone. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to catch more real stories that connect us, challenge us, and remind us we're never alone. Thank you for being here.